Welcome back to the program. We're talking about ESG investing and whether it's DOA on arrival. In the prior segment, we talked about what ESG investing is all about, right? Screening companies or the universe of companies for whether they meet certain environmental, social, or governance types of screens. The problem with that, and the problem that we've always had at Nelson Financial Planning with that approach, is that it eliminates or it weakens, in our view, the fiduciary duty that we have to our clients, which is that we want the most amount of money. We want the most amount of profit. That's what investing is all about. And that should be the sole focus as it relates to investing, because the reality is that anything else ultimately does nothing to improve your rate of return. We've said that for many years on this program, and now this past week, two different develops. We mentioned about the two global initiatives of all of the investment management companies that signed onto these alliances, these pledges to follow the Paris Accord and have net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050. Well, we mentioned that there was two different headlines that happened this past week that are directly on point. First and foremost, the folks at Vanguard became one of the firms that left this initiative, that withdrew from the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, that withdrew from the United Nations affiliated Glasgow Financial Allowance, that said, hey, you know what? We're out. Vanguard, one of the world's largest investment management companies. So we're going to read to you some of the things that the CEO of Vanguard, Tim Buckley, stated in an interview this past week with the Financial Times that explain why they did what they did. Some of this, if you've listened to the program before when we talk about ESG investing, should sound somewhat familiar. Number one, Vanguard's research indicates that ESG investing does not have any advantage over broad-based investing. In fact, over the past 5 years, of the active equity managers who outperformed the markets, not a single one relied exclusively on net zero methods. Loosely said, the results are in, they ain't good. If the fiduciary duty is to deliver client results and client investment performance, then no sense screening for that. Number two, ESG, if you stop and think about it, is actually a kind of a form of diversification. What do you mean by that? Well, diversification, right, is sort of the opposite of diversification. The point of diversification is you're selecting different companies to have a broad-based approach so that when things happen, there's other companies that might step up and have profit during periods of time where other types of companies are falling down. So if you are practicing ESG, you're in essence practicing diversification because you're clinging to a restricted list of companies and basically hoping for the best. So what'd you miss out on last year? The energy sector was up 60%. The tech sector was down 30%. If you'd had a diversified portfolio, owned both, yeah, you would have been okay. But if you were kind of following the ESG thing, guess what? You would have missed out on that piece that went up 60% to help offset the loss that was going off on the tech side of things. Exclusion, as with anything in life, any type of exclusionary policy in our view, but exclusion certainly never a good investment approach. What if a company that is doing good, if you will, and your definition of good and my definition of good may be different, and that's part of the other problem with the whole ESG thing. What if they're doing good but unable to deliver profits? Do you want to own that company? Probably not. Or what if the world has said, wow, these people are phenomenal and have sent the price of that company up so high that the opportunity to get additional profit going forward is probably not there. Do you want to own that kind of company? Number three, the political winds, as I think we all know, can blow in different directions based upon economic reality, based upon headlines, based upon changes in technology, right? I mean, see what's going on in Europe because of the Russia-Ukraine thing, and Europe's kind of had to change its tune on where it's going to get gas from and where it's going to get energy from. We have no interest, nor should you, in betting client money on whether politicians and regulators will consistently do the right thing. I'm not sure they will. It's highly amorphous when you start getting into this. And lastly, and most importantly, as we mentioned earlier in the program, the fiduciary duty to the client really is to achieve the best possible performance over time, to be good stewards of that money. So that's story number one. Vanguard saying, hey, you know what? This is just, it's too far, it's too much. Bottom line, there's not the performance there, so we're out. Vanguard withdrew from both of these initiatives earlier this week. That is story enough. But now let's forward to the second story that happened just this past week, and that's the first expected veto of the Biden administration. So this is it's just crazy that these stories have hit in the same week. Why is the Biden administration about ready to engage in its first veto of the Biden administration? Because the House voted 216 to 204 to block a Biden administration rule to allow ESG factors to come under consideration by retirement plan fiduciaries. There's a Labor Department rule, that effectively prioritize politics, if you will, over getting the best returns for your employer retirement options. The rule, by the way, not applicable to IRAs. Only to employer plans, because that's under the purview of the Department of Labor. Once again, another reason why, if you've got old 401ks, or if you're over 59 and a half and got a 401k, might want to consider rolling that over to an IRA, because the Department of Labor rules don't apply to IRAs. They only apply to qualified retirement plans, qualified employer plans. Because the rule effectively would have allowed retirement plan sponsors to use the ESG funds as the default option in the 401k. And let's face it, when it comes to default options, that's kind of what people take, right? They just kind of go with it. They don't bother to do it. So anyway, the whole default option, probably a topic for another show. So in a bit of a surprise, when this House resolution made it to the Senate, both Democratic Senators Joe Manchin and Jon Tester, Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Jon Tester of Montana, joined the Republicans to pass a resolution to repudiate this Department of Labor rule. So, if you're familiar with how kind of a bill works in Washington, right? Pass the House, pass the Senate, goes to the White House, where the current administration is on record. I don't think they've actually technically vetoed it as of the timing of this episode. They have said that they will, in fact, veto it, making it the first presidential veto of the Biden administration. Just too rich this week in terms of the headlines to not spend the first part of this program talking about this ESG stuff. Two major events, if you will, happening. The withdrawal of Vanguard from the Glasgow Financial Alliance, that happened on Monday, Tuesday, and then the whole conversation over the Department of Labor rule and the resolution that passed the House, passed the Senate, forcing the use of the first veto by the Biden administration. Certainly, this has shown a bright light on the shortcomings and failings, in our view, of ESG investing. Bottom line, as is always the case, and we've been doing this long enough to see these trends come and go, and we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Stay clear of any screening tools that don't put investor returns as the only thing that ultimately matters for your performance. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to be joined by fellow certified financial fiduciary and National Social Security Advisor Rob Fields. Going to talk a little bit about Social Security, get me off this ESG thing and get me a little more calmed down, talking about a program that is running short. Well, I'm not sure that's going to calm me down, but we're going to try. Stay tuned after these messages here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning.